At the same time as the Byzantine Empire was flourishing, the West was also following its own way during the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages. And it lost power and then eventually began to reassert itself later on. And here in 814, this slide here shows you the empire that he created around that year. And you'll notice he's taken back Italy now and most of Germany and France in those areas. So the West is beginning to sort of split from the Byzantine and their influence at this time. In the Western Catholic Church, as opposed to the Byzantine or Eastern Orthodox Catholic Church, this is the floor plan that they adopt. And it really sprang from a utilitarian reason. You're going to want to know the floor plan to the basic Gothic cathedral from Rome, the Western one. They're both interchangeable, Roman and Western Catholic. Okay, we're talking about Western Europe. The narthex is when you enter. The nave is where it's the largest central area of the church. That's where the parishioners would stand and kneel and pray. The crossing, of course, is where the altar usually is, but not always. Sometimes the altar can be set back in the apse. The reason why the crossing is important is because if you were to turn this in a different orientation, more north-south, this is based on sort of a crucifix. And it's meant to have that meaning. And at the center of the crucifix is, of course, the Christ figure in art. So that's why the altar is at the crossing. Rome, or the West, adopted, instead of the central floor plan, they adopted an existing building and turned it into a church. The existing building they used was a Roman basilica. And a Roman basilica, when ancient Rome was in power, was really used as sort of a meeting hall or an economic area for like trading and banking and marketplace, all that kind of thing. But here during Christianity, early Christianity, at first they conducted their ceremonies in catacombs, which are those mazes below the city, and in people's homes. But when Christianity was adopted by Herodotus and Constantine later on, basilicas were turned into churches, and that's why it's got that. That's one reason why it's got that sort of long horizontal format. This is the interior of a basilica that was transformed into a Catholic church of the West. You'll notice the upper windows up there are called clerestory windows. And early churches of this time period and through the Romanesque, which was about the year, started about the year 800, 900 in the West, that was the only source of light other than candlelight. And they let in natural light, but they always were placed up at the high top part of the building. Early Western Christian art or art of any type looked like this. Sort of a blending, a very uncomfortable blending of both old Greek Greco-Roman style and the emphasis of the spiritual and the fact that the body is no longer that important. So you get this weird sort of blending of the realistic and the ideal or the spiritual. And so neither one is really satisfactory in this way. It can't be both yet. All right, at least at this time period. Charlemagne was really the first, almost want to say emperor, Holy Roman Emperor. he is crowned on Christmas Day because he actually saves the Pope, Pope Leo, from being ousted through political maneuverings. Pope Leo had, the Roman Pope, had been accused of some crimes, and they were going to cut out his tongue. But because he was innocent, his tongue grew back. That's the myth. And Charlemagne supported Leo. And so Leo, therefore, and during a power play, Charlemagne won, and Leo therefore announced and crowned him on Christmas Day as the first Holy Roman Emperor. This is a portrait, an equestrian statue of Charlemagne. Notice how kind of short he looks. It's a smaller piece. It's only 9.5 inches high. It's not very robust or large-scale, impressive-looking equestrian statue like you think of usual equestrian statues being very large-scale. It's meant to be powerful. This is much tinier. He was a man that was very interested in literacy and in the arts. And his court is going to become very wealthy. And this is a cover of a gospel. And notice it's all bejeweled and inlaid. And it's got the crucifix in the middle, of course. Books were created, of course, by hand everywhere in the world. But in the West, monasteries and nunneries are the ones that produce books. And they're also the ones that hold the monopoly on books and education. So if you wanted, and they had lots of money, if you wanted to have an education, you sent your child to the monastery or the church to be educated. Therefore, books were very precious and very time-consuming to produce. Monks usually produced nothing but Christian doctrine or gospels or Bibles, sort of religious text. But every once in a while, they would produce an ancient Greco-Roman sort of writings every once in a while. But they would have kept it in their libraries. Art in the West is also going to take a lot of inspiration from art found in both Celtic and what we call the barbarian tribes, the northern tribes, the Vikings and the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths, and some from the Middle East. Their animal sort of patterning is going to be used as sort of inspiration for the way the art in the medieval time period in the West looks. Like this. This is one page from the Lindisfarne Gospels. Notice the year is about 700. And notice how completely swirling and super patterned and ornate this book leaf is. And it's meant for the viewer to not only be bedazzled by its beauty, but also to sort of get lost in looking and finding the things that are hidden inside all that patterning. Inside the Lindisfarne Gospels are images of the 4 main Gospels, and there below is St. Matthew. Usually shown as a symbol of a winged man. He was originally a tax collector, and because they call him the winged man or angel because his gospel opens up with description of the human ancestry of Christ. Okay. You'll notice how the imagery here, look how flat and decorative the patterning is, as well as the folds of the fabric. They're not really meant to be spatial. It's not meant to look three-dimensional. Even the hair, his head looks flat because it's not meant to look flat. It's not meant to look realistic. Remember, these are times when the body is meant to be denied to save the soul. Here is St. Mark, the winged lion. because he was the first bishop in Egypt, St. Mark, and suffered martyrdom there. He's literally called the voice in the wilderness, so therefore he's sort of known as the king of the desert to a lion. St. Luke is a winged bull, and also noticed to be both. St. Luke is also not only the patron saint of doctors, but also because he's meant to be a physician, but also of artists, because he's meant to have actually done a portrait of Christ. And St. John is considered an eagle, and he's painted and symbolized as an eagle because of his kind of wild, soaring writing style and his visionary he's got sort of this sort of crazy sort of vision in his Gospels. Romanesque art. About the year 1100 this begins, around 1100. It started earlier than that, but 1100. And this really, the Romanesque really refers to the use of the architectural things from ancient Rome, the barrel and the barrel vault and the rounded arch, which were foundational elements in Roman architecture. This is an early Romanesque cathedral in Toulouse, France. Notice we've got you can definitely see the crucifix sort of formation, floor plan from above here. But inside, it looks like this. It's getting taller. These churches are getting quite tall. Still quite severe on the outside looking. Much like the early Roman basilica-inspired early beginning Western churches. Very severe on the outside. Inside, what they've done is they've made it taller by using of that barrel vault, but they've also it still seems very heavy inside. There's very heavy walls, not a lot of stained glass. There's almost none of that here, but they are beginning to make their own mark on architecture as far as the Catholic Church. These are quite different than the Byzantine Catholic churches of the time, which were covered in tiny, tiny gold mosaics and all types of colored, mosaics and decorations inside. This is quite plain and severe inside, and they still use the Greco-Roman column orders as part of their decoration inside. This is the outside. This is called a tympanum. It's that semicircular sort of shape that holds this relief wall carving inside of it. That's called a tympanum. And this is a judgment scene here. There's Christ, of course, hierarchical scale, largest central figure, most important. On the left, we see the saved and the people that are going to be saved and angels up at the top registers. On the lower area, we see the people being judged and the damned on the far right, being flayed by old devils and imps and all kinds of horrible things. This is meant to not only instruct the people that can't read, which was 99% of the population, but also to inspire fear. Like this. Better get right with God or else. Sort of the theme here. Here's Judas. And notice he's hung himself, but he's also being tortured in death by devils. Here's a tiny Madonna, about 2 feet tall, and she's holding the Christ figure. But here, the Christ figure's face, people go, oh, it's not a very believable baby looking, is it? No, because he's meant to be. There's a lot of times when you see paintings and sculpture of Christ, even as an infant, he tends to look not quite infant-like, but he looks more like an older man. That's because he's born knowing. Knowing. Here he is both a teacher and a judge, and he's born knowing. But notice how the drapery folds around them. It doesn't even really respond to their human bodies because it's not really important. The folds in the fabric become more of a decorative thing than really telling us about the real way the human body really reacts under fabric. The Hildesheim doors are in St. Michael's in Germany. Tell a story from on the left side, the Old Testament, and on the right, scenes from the life of Christ. You start at the upper left and you go down, and you read all, and you kind of would know by the pictures what the story was being told. And then you hit the bottom right and you go on your way up to the end. And that's how the faithful would remember and read and remember the Bible stories, through pictures. These are not, of course, very well, I mean, look at these human figures here. They're not very believable compared to what we used to see back in ancient Rome and Greece. But that's not important here, remember. It's all about the spiritual. It's all about that. Saving the soul by denying the body. And here, it's also meant to be instructional. This is one of the first pieces of historical art that we know of in the world today that portrays an actual historical event. This is the Bayeux Tapestry. It took a lot of women, 5 or 10 years, I forget, to create, hand-stitch these 230-foot long story of how William the Conqueror came over from Normandy and assumed command over England, over the Anglo-Saxons. And in a battle, because the old king dies, and anyway, I don't want to get all the British politics behind that. He comes over from basically France and establishes the Normans and takes over and becomes the first king after the last one. But he's really from France. William the Conqueror. But it's a long, long tapestry told scene by scene, and you sort of read the pictures as it tells you the story.